All right, today we're looking at lesson 5, the controversy surrounding globalization, and at the same time we're trying to continue to build our A1, in this case, cartoon analysis skills. So, before I show you the paragraph that we have developed in the past, let's talk about some of the steps or tools or strategies that you've used to interpret this cartoon, and then we can see how close to understanding this assignment we're getting. So, what's one step that you found, and with regards to that step, how did you use it for this cartoon? Who wants to get us started? Yes?
I first time I did was identify the problem.
Okay, so often the first step that people will do is identify the problem that inspired the cartoon. And what problem do you see here?
Mexico is shedding sovereignty to, the way I interpreted it, to dive into Americanization.
Okay, absolutely. So a few things that you have done with that step is you've certainly done a little bit of work and you said, okay, the cartoon is from Mexico. So the individual from it, we may be able to assume, represents Mexico. So there is only one figure in it, and that figure is a personification of Mexico. So to use some English language arts terms, the cartoon has an individual, a figure, that represents Mexico. And we can infer that, we can assume that, because the cartoon is from Mexico, and there's no other labeling in there. There's no other labeling. If it was meant to be a specific person, there might be a name attached to the individual. So we can say that, in general, maybe it's representing Mexico as a collective. And as you said, it looks like they're shedding their sovereignty. And the language there is pretty great, shedding their sovereignty, right? Well, I know it's sovereignty because on the pants it says sovereignty. And they're jumping in, they're diving in, and I think you said Americanization, right? So it looks at globalization. When they dive in, they're going to be Americanized. So that's the dilemma here. The dilemma is that the cartoonist represents a dilemma. That if we jump into globalization, we're going to be Americanized. So we're going to shed our clothing, and when you shed your clothing, you're quite vulnerable, you're naked. So Mexico is vulnerable when they jump into the waves, right? The thrashing waves. And you can get into some of the description of what you see too. So there's some thrashing waves that is globalization. Globalization is not a safe place. But Mexico is, and we can put some emotion onto the figure, reluctantly jumping in. They don't look excited about it. Looks like that kid that's jumping off the high diving board for the first time. And they're not excited. They're like looking over at mom and dad saying, do I have to do this? So Mexico is reluctantly, diving into globalization. We can infer that the fear here is that they're going to be Americanized. That's why they're shedding their sovereignty. So a couple of other key points here might be, well, what does sovereignty mean then? What does the word sovereignty mean? Sovereignty means, in this context, just shout it out. It means sovereignty. Sovereignty. So it means, anybody Google it, anybody look it up, it's kind of a key point for the cartoon. Sovereignty means independence, means autonomy, means self-governing, means the ability to make your own choices. So if you are sovereign, you are autonomous, you are independent, you are self-governing. Mexico is, we can infer, we can assume that's Mexico, the personification of Mexico. They're anxious and depressed because it seems like they understand that they don't have a choice anymore. They have to dive into globalization. And with that, they're going to lose their independence, their sovereignty. And that makes sense then that they would be Americanized. They no longer will be Mexico, they will be Americanized Mexicans. So, what we are seeing is a sacrifice. In order to jump into globalization, they're sacrificing their sovereignty. And by doing that, they're going to be quite vulnerable. They're going to be naked. And that doesn't look like a person that wants to be naked. And that's not somebody that's up there on the high diving board, like posing for everyone because they're super proud of their nakedness. That's a person that looks upset about being vulnerable like this. What's another step that we can do to interpret the cartoon? So we have a problem. What is the solution that maybe the cartoonist wants? So put yourself in the perspective of the guy jumping off the diving board there. What's the solution that if you're a 4-year-old kid that has to jump off the high diving board and you don't want to, what's the solution you want?
Walk off the board.
Yeah, walk off the board. Like let's not do this. Like let's not do this. I'm gonna turn around. I'm gonna quit swimming lessons. Swimming sucks. I'm never gonna swim again. The pool hurts my eyes. Right? It stings. I don't like it. I get water in my lungs. So the individual, the personification of Mexico, and the cartoonist is expressing their emotions through that individual. We can infer that their solution might be to not embrace globalization. So their solution might be to not embrace the global village and try to isolate themselves from the world. So how do we keep our sovereignty? Well, maybe we don't jump into globalization. So the solution might be that maybe Mexico tries to limit their exposure, their interactedness, their interconnectedness with others. Let's limit how much globalization we're doing. Obviously, you're going to know the answer to the next question. What country is doing that today? What's a country that really limits, that have decided, you know what, I'm not going to jump off this high diving board? Yes. Yeah, so North Korea is modeling the behavior that maybe the cartoonist wants. And when Donald Trump said, "Make America Great Again," and he challenged American transnationals to relocate their sweatshops that are offshore back onshore, move those factory jobs back to the Rust Belt of the United States, and make sure that those manufacturing jobs benefit American labor and not labor in China, Indonesia, Vietnam. To some extent, Trump is saying the same thing as the cartoonist. We need to be cautious of our global ties. We need to be cautious about how much of our independence we're sacrificing. And in order to make America great again, to make America free and independent, we need to really think about the trade-off of jumping in. You know, how much are we sacrificing when we become dependent upon China for manufacturing? Or dependent upon Canada for softwood lumber? Maybe to make America great again, America needs to manufacture its own products. So to some extent, Donald Trump agrees with the cartoonist. Now, he doesn't agree that Mexico should be concerned. He still thinks that USA should be able to manipulate Mexico as much as they can to their benefit. But he'd also like to see the factories that are located in Mexico maybe come back to Detroit and other cities. Having said that, that talks about one of the possible actual inspirations of the source. Is what events in Mexico have led Mexicans to think this? Maybe the biggest one would be their economic ties with the U.S., like the maquilador sectors mentioned later in the textbook that you haven't seen. So you've had the textbook since Monday. I'm going to make a guess that nobody's like, "Ooh, cool, new book. I'm gonna skim through this. I want to see where this thing goes." So had you been like, "Ooh, cool, new book," and it's not a new book because it's the same book somebody had last year, but let's just pretend that it's a new book, but it's a new book to you. And sometimes when we get new books, we flip through them, and later in the book, we'll talk about how Mexico has been somewhat exploited by American transnationals who locate manufacturing plants in what is called the Maquiladora, northern section of Mexico. So that could be the actual event. The Maquiladora sector of Mexico, which leads to Americanization of some of the people of Mexico, that may be the event that inspired the cartoon. Any other steps that you use to break this down? So we have a problem, we have a solution, we have some values that we can go with the solution. So the solution is the ideological perspective, and we could assume that this cartoonist therefore values independence over interdependence, right? They want to be independent. They want Mexico to be independent, not interdependent. They don't want Mexico to be overly connected to others. Any other steps though? Yes?
Looking at the other side of the visual society,
Yeah, so another step, an important step, is to look at a cartoon and say that society is going to be divided on the issue that inspired the cartoon. And in this division, there will be some people that look at this cartoon and say, no, this is biased. This is not right. So what's the argument that they might make? The argument that the people that are opposed to the perspective of this cartoonist would make is that globalization is a good thing. They're going to say, no. Mexico's going to jump into that water, things are going to get better. Things will get better for Mexico. They're not going to need to shed their pants. Keep your pants on. Probably shouldn't swim in pants, maybe put some shorts on. But you're not going to lose your sovereignty, and rather than focusing on what you're losing, you should be focusing on what you're gaining. So the cartoon is biased because it's looking at the loss of sovereignty, and there's no evidence, no reference to what Mexico gains by jumping into the ocean of globalization. So we have seen in other sources already this year, in the controversy that is globalization, that there is some stuff to gain by joining the world. What might they gain? So what are some things? Obviously it's not on this cartoon because they left it off because they're biased. So what are some things that Mexico might gain by joining globalization? Yes? Yeah, so they're going to be able to import some goods. So now Mexico is going to get Canadian maple syrup. Right? They can import goods. They can have a varied diet. They can take advantage of other countries' comparative advantages and other countries' competitive advantages and the economies of scale. Yes?
a better economy?
Yeah, they might have a more diverse economy. They might be able to create jobs. That as Mexico has, Volkswagen, instead of being in Wolfsburg, Germany, they're going to be in, a plant will be in Pueblo, Mexico. It's going to create thousands of jobs. And it's not just manufacturing jobs. The people that work at that plant, there's many what could be called, white-collar jobs, blue-collar jobs. And so therefore you have manufacturing blue-collar, but you also have a lot of scientists that work there. So it is created like a little mecca of modernization and innovation. What else would Mexico gain? As they learn the language of English, we've seen in a chart earlier this week, what happens? More English,
more profit.
They're gonna have a higher per capita income. So as Mexico jumps into the ocean of globalization, one of the externalities of jumping in, as they get interconnected with others, they're going to pick up other languages. They're going to pick up English. And with English comes more opportunities. And we've seen some charts that show that your per capita income increases as your people become more fluent in English. Because English is the language of the global village. Any other benefits that they might have? Anytime that it might be good to be, instead of isolated, can you think of a hypothetical scenario where it's in the best interest of a country to be cooperating with other countries? Yes.
War.
So maybe during the war, so Mexico gets invaded. Oh man, maybe we should have had some friends. So if Mexico dives into globalization and they're swimming around, they're going to get some allies. And their allies maybe will help defend them from other aggressor states. Canada is part of an umbrella agency called NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And on our own, Canada is, a minor or maybe a medium power in the world in terms of our military might. But connected to the rest of NATO makes us nearly untouchable. So one of the benefits might be added military security because they're going to have allies. But we could go back and we could look at the negative side and suggest that no, the cartoonist isn't seeing the security, they're seeing insecurity, right? So the cartoonist is saying, no, it's not about getting more allies, it's about your borders are going to be open. And when your borders are open, you're going to lose sovereignty. So the cartoonist is seeing it from a different perspective. They're saying, as you jump into globalization, things won't get better, they'll get worse. Looking at COVID-19, the current pandemic that we're struggling through, you can see that what people have done, what countries have done during COVID-19, is they've jumped out of the water. They've gone back up here and they put back their pants on, right? Said, no, you know what, Canada, we're putting our pants back on. We need more sovereignty. So it's a messy metaphor. What am I talking about? What do I mean that Canada's kind of left the global pool a little bit and put her pants back on? Yes. We closed our borders. Exactly. So when Canada closes our borders, we're kind of like doing the opposite of this. We're not jumping in, we're jumping out. And that's what the cartoonist is saying, is that when you jump into globalization, you sacrifice some sovereignty. And this current crisis may be evidence that the cartoonist could be correct. So you can always use evidence to further the perspective. And the current crisis may be suggesting that there are times when we need sovereignty, and we might have to deglobalize. We might have to leave the global village, and limit how many travelers can come into Canada, and limit how much goods and services are flowing over our border. Any other steps you can do with the cartoon? Significance. So significance of the source, right? So what is the significance? If left unaddressed, if they don't talk about it, if the Mexicans don't really talk about what they're doing and they just jump in, or they don't jump in, what's the significance of not jumping in? Or what's the significance of jumping in is something that you could explore. So let's take a quick peek at the paragraph that we came up with, and let's see if I can get rid of that message that's irritating me on the side. Let's go off. Oh, that was easy. So one thing that we can do is you can always connect the cartoon to a question that it could be answering. If you're wanting to not just say source one is a cartoon, if you do want to have some kind of introduction to it, you could start at something like this. A subject of much controversy. That's a canned phrase, meaning I can use that phrase with anything. I'll use that phrase often. A subject of much controversy, comma, and then I'm going to look at, what is the topic or the theme of that cartoon? To what extent does globalization have a positive impact on our identity? So that's kind of like a big picture question or a big picture theme. I think we can probably be more specific. So we're going to start working from the broad to the more specific. So a subject of much controversy is, to what extent does globalization have a positive impact on our identity? Chapter 1 of the textbook, all about identity. Identity comes back in chapter 2 with assimilation, accommodation, acculturation. We talk about media and identity in chapter 3. Transnationals and identity as well. So identity is a part of this related issue 1 that we've been flying through. And now we want to talk about the division of society a little bit. So critics of globalization argue that globalization has led to the extinction of valuable traditions. In an ever-shrinking global village, consumers seem to willingly trade their history for a new but bland global homogenization. We have, as the character in the source, thrown off our traditional attire and have decided to leap into the dark and murky torrents of globalization. So rather than just saying leap into the water, we want to be somewhat descriptive to highlight the sophisticated level of identification of detail that we're exploring here. That it's not just water. The fact that it's dark and murky is significant because that shows us about the danger and about the unknown factor of jumping in. So do try to be descriptive. We have, as the character in the source, thrown off our traditional attire. So we're talking about, getting rid of some of those traditions, the sacrifice being made, and have decided to leap into the dark and murky torrents of globalization. The cartoonist is concerned that globalization might be more dangerous than we might otherwise assume. The water's dangerous and there will be casualties. But if it is the free will of the individuals, and I'm not sure that character wants to jump in, looks very tentative about it. But if it is the free will of the individuals, whether or not they jump into the water, then the consequences are acceptable. The cartoonist seems to suggest, based on the fear and reluctance shown on the character's face, that there really is no longer a choice to exist outside of globalization. So this is one of those reluctant last people to jump in. And maybe they're reluctant because they've seen other people jump in and get destroyed by the waves, by the riptide, by the currents, by the undercurrent. I don't have any other references because living in Alberta, we don't have the ocean right there, so we don't have a lot of ocean-like words to use here. But we can assume that, there is a reluctance here on the part of the character. But there is no choice to exist outside of globalization. And looking at the world today, there aren't many countries, North Korea may be the exception, that exist primarily out of the global village. Even North Korea relies on China. Without their connection to China, North Korea would not be a viable state today. They got a lot of aid from China. This claim would be supported by observing the inability for all nations to achieve autarky. So autarky is a word that you're adding to your vocabulary today if you didn't already know it. Autarky means independence. It means a country that doesn't need to be interdependent with anyone else. We need bananas, we got bananas. We need maple syrup, we got maple syrup. We need guns, we make our own guns. We need to watch music or listen to music and watch movies. We have a homegrown cultural industry. We don't need to import anything. That's autarky. In the 1930s, Adolf Hitler's Germany was attempting to achieve autarky before they started the war, because they knew once the war started, people would be trading with them. So autarky is independence. You don't need to be interdependent to provide the goods and services to people, but this claim that they have to jump in would be supported by observing the inability for all nations to achieve autarky. We truly need each other. A closer look at the visual clues within the source also unlocks the perspective that by jumping in to globalization, nations and individuals lose their sovereignty. This argument is a staple for anti-globalists who continue to suggest the risk of becoming too immersed into something like the ocean that we cannot control. So you can't control the ocean. You're not Samson, or who's the guy from MCU that's the ocean guy? Or the DCU, who's the ocean guy? Aquaman would be one of them. And then the opposite is, I don't know, maybe it is? No, it's not Samson. So we'll just say Aquaman. So you're not Aquaman, you can't control the ocean. So the individual jumping into the ocean, this is a dangerous thing, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. And that's like globalization. That's why they're losing their sovereignty. So not only do we talk about the division of society, not only do we say some people would be opposed to it, But rather than saying some people, we use the term anti-globalists. Be as specific as possible. Specific is 80. Generalized is 60. Some people, some is general. Some people don't like the cartoon. That's a very general statement. Anti-globalists don't like it. That's being more specific. Anti-globalists don't like it because that's being more sophisticated. 100%. So sometimes when you look at a student that ended up getting 60 on these assignments, 80 and 100, you'll look at their answers and their answers will be saying similar things. Just the student that says an 80 will be more specific about it. And a student that gets to 100, they'll be more insightful and sophisticated. They'll go into more depth. Just a mask break right there. I'm just gonna breathe in some mask air for a second. Mask air. The best air. As we become dependent on others, we lose the ability to be self-governing, to be independent, to be sovereign. That's the sacrifice being made when we jump in. A last feature worth noting is that the cartoon is from Mexico, right? It's from Mexico. As a nation, at the crossroads of industrialization and development, the nation is making many difficult choices that will determine their future. Should they embrace traditions, or should they discard them and leap into the dark unknown? The cartoonist is suggesting that it's dangerous to leap into the dark unknown, but sadly, Mexico doesn't seem to have a choice. There it is, ladies and gentlemen, your A1.